All right, good evening. Now, we've had regular conversations about the CAA or the Citizenship Amendment Act. And right now, joining me is Mr. Sanjay Hegde, who's a senior advocate with the Supreme Court. Also, very interestingly, Mr. Hegde was appointed mediator between government and the protesters in Shaheen Bagh. Now, you'll remember Shaheen Bagh, this was pre COVID. Like I said, it does seem like a different lifetime. But there were women, fundamentally Muslim women, who were camped out on the streets for 4 months in the winter at that time, demanding that CA NRC be rolled back. Mr. Hegde was in conversation with them before COVID broke out, but he will tell us what the legal arguments are against CAA. Mr. Hegde, fundamentally, from your conversations with the protesters at Shaheen Bagh, did you believe that their demands were legally sound or valid?
See, there are several things that happened at Shaheen Bagh. Firstly, I was appointed as an interlocutor sent by the Supreme Court. I did not have any mandate from the government to mediate. The Supreme Court said, please go and tell the protesters that they can protest, but they can't protest at this spot or they can't hold up traffic. And it did give me a reasonably long rope. Me and Sadhna Ramchandran, we tried our best to speak to the protesters. And the thing about the Shaheen Bagh protests were that there was no one leader. It was organic. And there were several sets of people. So for whatever reasons, while all our efforts went on, they didn't have come to fruition because COVID intervened. What I found, however, in Shaheen Bagh was that everybody was proudly Indian. And secondly, that when you questioned their Indianness, it was like a personal wound. And so there are several other factors also. Now, getting into the legal parts of it. Though we use this hashtag very freely, CAA NRC, actually they are two different things. The Citizenship Amendment Act is an act which has certain provisions which allows the government to grant citizenship. And this particular amendment has certain phrases or the absence of certain communities has caused a problem. The NRC, however, is a Assam-specific process. In Assam, at around the time of partition, there were people who went back and forth over the border. There were all kinds. Assam itself was partitioned. The Sylhet district of Assam went over to East Pakistan after a referendum. So officials there were not very certain as to who was to be counted as an Indian citizen, who was not to be counted as an Indian citizen, and all that. And often what also happened was that people stayed where they were, and boundaries were drawn on maps, though not strictly enforced on the ground. There were no demarcating lines, all kinds of things. So the officials there created a list of citizens that these definitely are our citizens. This is way back in the 1950s. Then there were several things that happened in Assam, including the Assam movement against illegal immigration, this, that, and the other. But there was apparently a professor in Guwahati who had this idea that if you updated the existing NRC, whoever had an ancestor on that NRC, then you know for certain that that person was Indian. And based on that logic, the Supreme Court, a bench which was headed by an Assamese judge who later became Chief Justice and is currently a member of the Rajya Sabha, ran with that idea. So everybody in Assam ended up having to prove that their ancestor was on that original list of the 1950s. Now, in data science and in computer science, you have a phrase called GIGO,
Hmm.
garbage in, garbage out. So if your basic data of the 1950s was flawed and it was flawed because it was not complete, it was not done after any specific open public process, and also yeah, some districts were entirely excluded. So anyway, everybody was put to great inconvenience. They also, certain people were detained in extradition camps, which were actually prisons, because they had been found to be foreigners by foreigners tribunals. So everything that happened in Assam with regard to the determination of the citizenship of people resident there had a great impact over the rest of India. So when the CAA protests all began, there was also a feeling that now the NRC will come in and that we will be deported if we this, and so that plus uh, I think it was great administrative mishandling at the local level, which solidified the protests at Shaheen Bagh. The Shaheen Bagh protest started, just 1 minute,
Yes.
when students in Jamia were lathi charged. So Shaheen Bagh is about the next police station from Jamia.
Hmm.
Ladies sat on the ground. Then more people followed, and it was the Delhi elections at that point of time. It was perfectly nicely polarizing, and it was allowed to continue. This is my rough sketching of what happened during Shaheen Bagh. So that having been said, let's get back to the basic problem legally as far as Citizenship Amendment Act is concerned.
But
When you
let me, yes,
Yes,
let me
yes,
just rephrase the
yes,
ask you. Yes, ask you the
continue.
question again. The government has reiterated over and over again that the Citizenship Amendment Act, or the CAA, is meant to grant citizenship. It is not meant to take away anybody's citizenship. So, by no means should anyone, any valid citizen of this country, be made nervous by it. But yet, there seems to be some nervousness, Mr. Hegde. Why do you think that is?
You used a very good adjective, valid citizen. Now, from the days when we grew up, when we said, India is my country, all Indians are my brothers and sisters. Now, we have an act which says that we will be granting citizenship to people, but we will not be granting citizenship to these people through this route. We will have a fast track for citizenship of preferred uh, religions, and the others can come on the slow track, and where we may consider, we may not consider, and things like that. So it's for the first time that the religious identity marker has been used for an administrative exercise. Today, it may be for denial of citizenship to outsiders. When does the outsider, when does the insider become the outsider?
Hmm.
That is the fear, and that has driven a lot of these events that have happened after this 2019 Amendment Act.
There was also at that point a statement made by the Home Minister back in 2018-19 where he said, "आप chronology समझ लीजिए, पहले CA आएगा, फिर NRC आएगा, और बस बंगाल में नहीं, पूरे देश में आएगा." After that, the government has sort of maybe retreated or maybe pulled back a little bit on the nationwide NRC and only done it in Assam so far. Do you think that assuming it will happen and because it will happen, it will cause problems is fair? Or should we trust the fact that the government has said there's nothing to worry about?
Well, whenever governments say don't worry, people do have a tendency to worry. If the government says don't worry, the prices are under control, then you know that prices are not under control, right? And I'm not speaking of this government alone, all governments. Now, yes, the Home Minister used a certain phraseology, a chronology समझिए. Now, who was it he was explaining to, and who took what explanation is a question which has had great political ramifications. There is no question of an NRC being done the way it was done in Assam. Assam, as I told you, had an existing database, imperfect database from the 1950s, which it sought to update. No other state in India, to the best of my knowledge, has any kind of documentation as to who were citizens at the time of partition.
Mm.
I don't think it exists in Punjab, Haryana, or any of the places which were, or Bengal for that matter. Now, how do you define a citizen? You define it according to the Citizenship Act. You are born in India, your
Mm.
parents were born in India, etc., etc., etc. Or you have applied for naturalization, and the government has allowed you to become a naturalized Indian citizen. So the question of now, what power you concede to the government to define a preferred category of citizens as opposed to a left out category of citizens. That is what is causing a great deal of anxiety. And what has happened in Assam has not helped at all.
Mm.
Maybe if the government were to come out and say that, look, Assam was a specific case, it was a different case, and it was an exercise which was mandated by the judges of the Supreme Court as it then existed. We have no other orders anywhere else, and we are not going to go around checking all our 1.4 billion citizens and telling them to produce papers. When I thought about it, uh, we uh, we are a family of five brothers and sisters, and four brothers and a sister all over the globe. I am 100% sure that none of my siblings who are abroad actually you would know the name of their paternal grandparents,
Mm.
because my paternal grandfather died way before independence, when my father was a small kid. So there are so many family stories like that. And this is in the case of a middle class, upper middle class household. Please look at the poor,
Yeah.
the people who don't really keep records. How are they to trace back their ancestry? And citizenship is not always a matter of ancestry. And if in the ancestry you start dividing based on religion, then obviously people who follow certain religions might get very apprehensive that they may not be able to make the case.
Mr. Hegde, let me ask you an academic legal question, hypothetical if you may. After this was done, CA was brought in 2019. There was COVID, and then there were 200 different petitions that were placed before the Supreme Court to examine the matter of CA, and given the fact that it might be in violation of a fundamental right of Article 14. The Supreme Court clubbed all of those petitions, but has not found the time to hear them. Now, my academic hypothetical question is this. If I were to ask you whether the Supreme Court should have heard it by now, would I be in contempt?
No, you would not be in contempt. Many people keep saying that, the court should have heard this question of law first, that question of law. The process is such that when there is something which is hot off the on the iron, the courts often want to calmly deliberate on it, and sometimes they think that the time is not right to decide it also. Now, this happened, if you remember, in December 2019, and by March 2020,
COVID.
we were in COVID. which we got out towards the end of 21.
Yes.
From 22 onwards, there were several other things which occupied the court. And but for the fact that in the meanwhile, the government had not notified the rules, the act had not been operationalized. So there was no immediate overwhelming urgency. Now that the government has notified it, and there are already petitions which have been filed challenging the rules, the court will have to take a call. Do we first examine the validity of the rules, or do we
Mm,
examine the parent act itself? And there the choices are, to my mind, obvious. They will say, okay, we'll examine the validity. We'll have a hearing.
mm.
Now, I think that also was part of the government game plan. If somebody, I do not attribute very great thinking to very many governments, but sometimes there could have been a calculation. Okay, a court hearing with all its passion, and today with everybody following it on YouTube and things like that, will also serve the purpose of keeping this issue live and
Right.
polarizing.
Mr. Hegde, Yogesh Singh Pal is asking this question on our timeline. And a lot of people have asked it on my timeline over the last couple of days, saying Rohingyas and Bangladeshis have their own country, which is an Islamic nation. Why should we be giving them citizenship? It's foolishness. Muslims cannot be persecuted in an Islamic nation. That's just the way things are. Um, so, Rolly, would it be fair to say that the Citizenship Amendment Act on its own is perhaps not as worrying? It's worrying only if the NRC is brought along with it, or by itself as it stands right now, do you consider it cause of concern?
See, it is a cause of concern. What is a foundational idea of India? That we are all Indians, irrespective of our religion, our languages, our dress, our food, or any social identity markers. If we are on the within the boundaries, and we were can our ancestors were on these boundaries, then that's it. Now, to say that no, look, these people or this community anyway has 57 other countries, or the other community has so many other Christian countries, or so things like that,
Yes.
is to identify uh, countries as designated spaces for certain religions to go. That's not the idea of India. So, and as far as the gentleman's question is concerned, the only thing I'd like to say is that, our finest victory on the field of war was 1971.
Yes.
We did not discriminate between Hindu and Muslim refugee coming
Bangladesh.
into India, and many of them went back. Some of them stayed. And it was precisely because we did not discriminate. Our idea of India was stronger than the idea of Pakistan, which was based not only on religion but also on language in the case of Bangladesh.
Hmm.
So we went on then to a famous victory. It always the idea that people can carry on together is a much stronger idea and a much more foundational idea
Yes.
than that some people are superior and have a first claim and some people are inferior.
Right. Mr. Hegde, thank you so much. To our audience, I promised Mr. Hegde that I would let him go at 7:15 so he can go take his evening walk. So I'm going to keep my word. Thank you so much for giving us time and having this conversation. I suspect we'll have to have more conversations about CA as the matter progresses. But for this evening, thank you for that explanation for our audience. There's also a detailed explainer put up on our YouTube page. Take a look at that as well. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to download the Beetroot News app for news and updates. Have a good evening.